Okay, here we are. We're talking the Advent season as we're going through this, and I'm going to give you a review where we started last week, because what we're doing is very traditionally Christian. You do the 4 Sundays of Advent leading up to Christmas, and there's usually there's a pretty well decided path of what you talk about on the 4 Sundays of Advent. But we are about as non-traditional as anyone in the world. So the only thing that we're doing that overlaps is we're doing 4 Sundays talking about the coming of the Messiah, Jesus. But last week we started that, and we're really we're so untraditional in this particular sense. What we're trying to do is paint the biggest picture we can paint about Christmas. So it's not this. This is what we normally think of as Christmas. These cutesy pictures with Jesus and the baby in the manger and the star, and there's even some guys out there in camels. That's not what we're doing. Okay, so that's a true story. Jesus was born in a manger and all that kind of stuff. But that's a very small perspective on the coming of the Messiah. We need to take the bigger perspective. That's what we're doing. We're going to the bigger side of this, because you already know this part very, very well. And last week what we did is we looked at this circumference, basically. There was a quote from G.K. Chesterton, and he said the God who had been only a circumference was seen as a center. So really, the circumference is this idea that God is very, very large. He's larger than the universe. And so part of the marvel of Christmas is this God who's larger than the universe shrunk himself down to a baby. So that's what we're looking at, because that's incredible. So to help us visualize that, here's a picture right off the Hubble telescope. I was going to say spaceship, but it's not a spaceship. But this is the M96 galaxy. We can see it's 35 million light years away, which means if you turn on a flashlight right now at night and you aim it in that direction, it won't get there for 35 million years, the light. Yeah. Yeah, you need a center to make a circumference, yeah. So really, Chesterton is saying that God is just gigantic. He's bigger than the entire universe. Even the M96 spiral galaxy is small compared to the extent of the universe, and it's 100,000 light years across. Light takes 100,000 years to get from one end to the other. That's a big neighborhood, and the neighborhood's even bigger than that. So Chesterton is saying, and this is what we want to focus on for the next 3 weeks, is that God is seen as a circumference. He's outside of all that. He's outside of the entire universe, and yet Christmas is when the one who's outside the universe and bigger than everything comes down as a point, and its center is infinitely small. So that's the big picture we're trying to paint about all that, because it's just an extraordinary thing. Last week we looked at this verse, these verses here in Isaiah 9, very classical. If you heard Handel's Messiah, there's an oratorio that goes with this. For unto us a child is born, join me. Unto us a son is given. Okay, you know it. Never mind. So, and it has this in it. Unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Those 4 titles and what goes with the rest of that part in Isaiah is big. It's really big. So that's probably the most mind-blowing big to small verse I can think of, because this one who is Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace is the Son that's given. So really it's like whoosh, in one fell swoop. By the way, just as an aside, this week I was, I cruise the internet like everyone else does. And every year I like to go and see what the LDS Church puts online. They usually do a video every year. They quoted this verse, but out of those 4 titles, they left one of those titles out. You know which one they left out? Everlasting Father. It's not on the list. So you got to be careful when you watch stuff. They quote Isaiah 9, but they leave out Everlasting Father. So it's not translated correctly. Well, and as another aside on that, Isaiah, in specific in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is the one book of the Old Testament that we have in its entirety in the Dead Sea Scrolls, written, penned without question over a century before Jesus was born. And so any assertions that anyone might make that the content was dinked with after Jesus doesn't know what they're talking about, because we dug this up and it was put on paper 100 years before. So it was there. Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Okay, that was last week. So this week we're going to move forward on this entire thing. Today, the second Sunday in Advent, we're going to go to a classic Christmas passage, Matthew 21. Here we go. Here, another parable, Jesus says, Matthew 21:33. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard And he put a fence around it, and he dug a wine press in it, and he built a tower, and he leased it to tenants. So Jesus is telling a story about this wonderful place, this money-making venture growing grapes, right? And the master who owns this, who owns the entire property, does this and develops it into a good money-making venture. He plants the grapes. He makes a wine press so you can actually process the grapes, a tower so you can watch out for marauders coming from a distance, and it's just it's a gorgeous place. It's a gorgeous place. And he takes that and he leases it to some tenants who are going to work it for him, and then the owner of this great, productive, money-making venture of great blessing, he went into another country. So he leaves. Because he's got other business, presumably. And he leaves behind in this wonderful place, this wonderful vineyard, these people to work it for him. Now, if you've ever been to commercial vineyards, they're nice places. I mean, you could just walk through them and just go, I mean, it's really something. And when the grapes are on the vines, there's this perfume that kind of moves through it. It's luxurious. And so in the Old and New Testaments, in the Middle East, anytime you want to think about luxury, there's two items that are always associated with luxury in the Old Testament. One is fat. We're talking about fat on an animal, not on us. And the other is grapes in a vineyard. It's just luxurious. It is luxurious beyond question. So here, this very luxurious money-making place, the owner who owns everything puts this together, gets tenants, they're there, presumably to work it on his behalf, and they'll have to pay a tax of food, of some of these grapes as for the benefit of being there. By the way, do you know what the actual percentage was of your harvest that you had give to the owner if you were a tenant farmer? 10%. That's where tithe comes from. Which is why when the Israelites move into the promised land, the owner of the promised land is God, and they pay lease of 10% on it. That's what tithe is for them. Okay. So he goes to another country. Now, when the season for the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit, that's 10%. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, stoned another. That's bad. That's very bad. That's very bad. I know. It's horrible. And that's why Jesus is telling this story. He's telling this to people who understand that this is a fundamental sin against the owner of the property. I mean, he put all this work into this property. He got it running for their benefit so they can work it, so they can get rich off of it as well. They do all this stuff. They don't own it. And so when the owner comes and asks for his rightful share, because after all, the land belongs to him, they completely say, no, we want all of it. And so they kill him. They won't take their share. Well, that's verse 35. Verse 36, again, he sent other servants, more than the first, maybe if I send twice as many guys, and they did the same to them, so they killed them as well. Finally, verse 37, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. Because up till now, all the servants that came from the owner were not respected. When they came on the land, they said, it's right and proper. My master owns this place. You need to give your 10% to him because he's the one that owns this place, and out of the graciousness of his heart, he lets you be here. All you have to do is provide the 10%. That's all the owner's asking. But you totally disrespect the messengers and kill them. Right? I'll send my son. They'll respect my son. Verse 38. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and have his inheritance. So before that, they disrespect the servants because they want to keep their crop. But now they say, since the son has come, since all of this, which is owned by the master here, since all of this is going to the master, and when the master dies to his son, if we kill his son, we can keep it all and forever, because there will be no heir to get on our backs. So we'll kill him. So we want what the owner owns, and we'll do it by force. And they took him, and they threw him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. Now remember, this is still just a story. But does it ring any bells? It should be ringing some bells, okay? Well, this classic Christmas story is not a Christmas story. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? And the Pharisees listening to him said to him, he will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits of in their seasons. So they even said, this is grossly unjust and disrespectful of the owner of the property. by the words of the Pharisees themselves. This is totally wrong. But they didn't understand the bigger picture going on here. And also you're probably wondering, I thought we were going to talk the bigger Christmas thing, because you know what? Hey, this is not about Christmas, is it? No, it's not. It's not about Christmas. Not yet. Also, you're not about Christmas either. So anyway, why are we talking about this when we're talking about the 4 Sundays of Advent? Well, because I told you we wanted to get a big picture. This is a very big picture of the coming of the Messiah. Because we know how it's going to end, right? We know how he's going to be received. And we know that there were those that came before the Messiah, Jesus, who tried to communicate to the Israelites and to the world the nature of the way things really are, and they were killed. That's what this story is. So now that you got this story in your hip pocket, now we're finally going to go to the passage today that we want to do for Christmas. Okay? Here we go. We come back to the big picture. The God who had been only a circumference was seen as a center. The large God came down to be a small baby, and the center is infinitely small, especially when you figure how large the universe is. He comes. So here's the picture. We're going to Hebrews 1. Hebrews 1. This is the passage for the second Sunday in Advent. 1:1. Actually, it's the opening verses in Hebrews. Long ago, and in many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. Remember the messengers from the owner? How were they received? Not really good. Legend goes that Isaiah, the great prophet Isaiah, from whom we get the 66 chapters of Isaiah and the passage we looked at last week, Isaiah, by legend, was sawn in two inside of a log. Really? Sawn in two. That's the legend, and it's pretty well founded. Yeah. So look at the end of Hebrews 11, and you'll see kind of the terrible places what happened to some of these guys. But it's very clear God was sending messages through his spokesman, the prophets, to the nation of Israel and to the world, and they were not well received. By the way, a prophet, quote unquote, in the Old Testament is never the leader of a church, and he is never well received. Just saying. That's the Old Testament. That's how it goes. So anyway, long ago, and in many times, you remember Jesus talked about these guys coming several times? Many times, many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. Verse 2, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Keep your thinking caps on. Seeing the connection to the other thing? He's spoken to us in the Son. So really what's going on is the God of the circumference has come to speak to us from the Father by the Son in this tiny little spot. So there's something about the big picture of Christmas, which is about God finally saying, I've tried to communicate through my prophets. You killed them. The message got through, but the message getting through is what got them killed. But now I'm sending my Son to speak. So we should see a dramatically different communication of the message of God in more powerful form. But we already know from that parable, they're not going to like the message. This Son whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. Remember the heir in the story? He's the one who actually not only owns the vineyard, but once the father's gone off the scene, he inherits it. He's the heir of all things. He's the heir. And they killed him thinking, if we kill the heir, then we can take what's his. Well, the writer of Hebrews is saying right here, this one who came spoke for God after God tried a long time in many ways through prophets. He'll speak for God. And by the way, it's been the plan since the beginning of the universe that this one who would come in the flesh is the heir of all things. What does that mean? Well, that means the chair that you're sitting on belongs to him. That means the trees outside belong to him. That means the air that you'll breathe in the next 30 seconds belongs to him. That means the stars you see at night belong to him. That means this entire place, this wonderful vineyard that we live in, all belong to him. And we're squatters on God's creation. Now, he wants us to be here, but you have to understand we don't live to take over this vineyard. We live here at his graciousness, just like the owner in the story, and his mercy. But the minute that you disregard the owner of the vineyard, you're in the same place as the guys in the story. A fool says in his heart, there's no God. And yet God has made this vineyard in a way, according to Romans 1, in a way that we can actually look at it and say, hey, someone made this place. And if someone made this place, then maybe it belongs to the one who made it. If he made this place and he allows me to be here, including making me, maybe there's a point to this place. And maybe I owe him something because I live in this place at his graciousness. There's this indebtedness. Oh, you can just go so far. So he appointed him the heir of all things. That is, the entire universe is going to him. And he also made it. So he created it, and it's his. That's all he's saying. It's an ownership issue. Remember how it goes? Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they'll respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and have his inheritance. And then they took him out, threw him out of the vineyard, and they killed him. There is a very close correlation between this parable and the big picture of the universe. And us, as tenant farmers, becoming squatters when we disregard and disrespect the owner, God himself. And I've heard a lot of people say, secular people say, you say that you say that there's something wrong between me and God. I never did anything. I never dissed God. I never said anything bad about God. Why is God so mad with me? What is it you said I deserve hell for? Because after all, I've never said a bad word about God in my entire life because, well, I don't believe it even exists. There it is. There it is. And again, according to Romans 1 and some other places, God says they have no excuse. They know that there's an owner of this place. And they know that as long as they disregard him and disrespect him, they're squatters saying, I want what you made, God, but I don't want you. And I'm going to completely disregard you as owner of this place. I owe you nothing because everyone gets this. No. No. You don't want to go there. So we go on in Hebrews 1. Well, remember this. This is what the Pharisees said. He'll put those wretches to a miserable death. This is what ought to happen to the tenant farmers. This is what ought to happen. According to the Pharisees who understand God's word, it was a grave injustice that deserved death. It was so heinous. Now, when you extend this to the larger cosmic picture of the Messiah, the Son of God, the heir of all things, coming into our midst to clue us in to speak where the prophets have tried to speak in the past to warn about the owner of everything, then you come to understand that there's a huge indebtedness on the part of mankind. And there's a huge danger. This is the judgment of God against a disrespectful and an ungrateful creation who would say, I want your stuff, but I don't want you. By the way, that was the message of the prodigal son. I want your stuff, I don't want you. And the Pharisees themselves are saying they deserve miserable deaths. So, the next time someone says, I've never said anything bad about God, well, the minute you disregard the fact that he's the owner of everything, you've done it. You're in deep weeds. And we're born that way. We're born disregarding and not worshiping and thankful to God, the one who gave us this wonderful place, even gives us the breath that we take every day. We're indebted to him. And it's his graciousness that he gives it to us before we even realize we need to be thankful. But wait a second, Jesus didn't bring miserable death to anybody. This Santa guy. Well, that's right. That's right. He didn't. But the point is that's what mankind deserves. And you got to keep that in your hip pocket. That's what mankind deserves. Because it wants God's stuff, but it doesn't want God. Yeah, he didn't. So what did he do? Well, the writer of Hebrews goes on and tells us. He says in Hebrews 1:3, he's the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. So here's this God at circumference, big and larger than the entire universe, massless. Although the universe has mass, God doesn't. He's a spirit. So he's bigger than all of this stuff. This one who came at the beginning, Hebrews 1:1, it says he came to speak about something, right? He came to speak about something in the ways that the prophets in the past have tried to speak, and they've been killed, and they're going to kill Jesus as well, speaking the same thing. What is he speaking? Who God is, to start with. And the writer of Hebrews says it like this. He says, he didn't, in a very eloquent way, he doesn't say, well, he spent his entire day talking about who God the Father is, who God is, with the nature of this place that we're in, that we've actually become creation squatters because we're not respecting who God is. He doesn't say that. What the writer of Hebrews says is first, he's the radiance of the glory of God. What? It's great language. So I always think about flashlights, right? A flashlight makes light. That's a prophet right there. But if you turn on the flashlight and no light comes out of it, then the bulb doesn't work, right? In fact, the bulb inside the flashlight doesn't really function as a bulb unless there's light coming out of it. And it's the light that's evidence that there's a bulb at all. In fact, if you want to know the nature of that bulb, look at the light it makes. So this is what he's talking about. There is this God who is like a circumference. He's way out there. You can't see him. You can't be in his presence. He's big and he's out there and he's very much unlike us. But if you want to know what he's like, look at the light that comes from him, which not only gives us understanding in the darkness where we live, but it illuminates us about who he is. And it gives glory to who he is. It describes in a large fashion who he is. So sure enough, you look at the New Testament, you look at Jesus, and he's walking around, and Philip asks him, Jesus, just show us the Father. That'll be good enough for us. And Jesus says to him, wait a second. How long have I been with you? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Radiance of the glory of God. It's a radiance. And Jesus goes on many times saying, listen, there's not a thing I've ever said that I didn't hear from the Father. There's not a single thing I did that's not what the Father does. I mean, that's how much I represent him. But this radiance idea means to go from one place into another. So in a real sense, this is God at the circumference shining into mankind and saying, get a clue, this is who I am. Radiance is always about taking the source of the light and putting it someplace else. So there's really this kind of transcending the entire universe to give us an understanding who God is. So Jesus came, according to the writers of Hebrews. The message that he brought, that the prophets also brought, was that this is who God is. So when you look at Jesus, you can understand who God is. It's very, very convenient and very respectful of us, because we can't look at something the size of the spiral galaxy that we're looking there that's 35 million light years away. We can't look at that as though we're looking at God and trying to understand him. So he says, hey, that's okay. Don't come to me. I'll come to you. And so he comes to us as the form of a baby and as a man, and illustrates perfectly, fully, who God is and what the plan is for this vineyard. That's what he does. And then he uses another nice thing. He's the exact imprint of his character. The word in Greek, it's the word character. What? Like they used to say of me, there's a real character over there. Yeah. Well, no, character in the Greek means an imprint. So character came from actually the invention of typewriters. Mention of typewriters, you have these little things. Has anyone used a mechanical typewriter in this room? There we go. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Mechanical typewriter, you hit the buttons and this little thing goes, psh, and that thing right there makes an imprint of itself on the page so that the thing on the page looks just like the thing. That's a character. It's a perfect representation of this thing. What's this thing called? Is that type? I don't know. Well, anyway, and then back during the first century, character was more often used when a king had a signet ring that had a carving in it that represented who he was, and he would put that in molten wax and pull it out. It would leave an exact representation of his ring. Character. It was a character. So what's he saying right here about Jesus? Well, kind of like a penny, he is the exact imprint of the person whose picture is on the coin. Growing up as a kid, 99% of my understanding of what Abraham Lincoln looked like was my pennies. Well, our understanding of the nature of God comes from his perfect imprint in his Son. Perfect imprint. He is the exact imprint of his nature. So it's not the imprint of his face, like Lincoln. It's the imprint of his nature. If you want to know about the nature of God, look at Jesus, because he's the perfect imprint. We can see the printed part. I'll never be able to see Abraham Lincoln live, but I'll be able to see his pennies. I may never be able to see God face to face, but I've seen his Son. So Jesus came as the Son to let us know what the Father's like. So it's very simple. Both as an outshining, a radiance. It comes from outside and it radiates in, and it shines in mankind. And both in the physical flesh, he's the perfect imprint of who God is. So the message that Jesus brings is, this is what the Father is like. Even though truly he is a circumference in terms of bigger than the whole universe, but I can tell you about his nature, look at me. That's what Jesus came as. That's what the writer of Hebrews is telling us in verse 3. Also, he tells us that this same one upholds the universe by the word of his power. This is part of the message. he comes into the creation itself and says, this place is hanging together because of me. What? Yes. And in another place in some of Paul's writing, he says the same thing. That he says basically that it's all held together by him. There's a great, almost humorous problem in science today, is that when you look at the atom, you look at the way things are made, no one can figure out why things stay together. I do. I mean, literally, when you look at the nature and how the atom is formed, and you look at things that we know about, like gravitational attractions and about electromagnetic attractions and all that kind of stuff we know about, and about the particles that comprise the atom, you look at it and say, yeah, but you know what? We're still missing something, because this sucker ought to just fly apart. We should all just kind of completely dissociate. There's no reason why we should hold together right where we're sitting, down to the very atoms that you are in the chair that you're sitting on. It should not hold together. So the scientists came up with this great, wonderful, mysterious force called the strong force. That's what holds atoms together. I'm not kidding. That's, to this very day, that's it. That's the technical term for why the atoms hold together, the strong force. I love science. I love science. And you know, even on a larger scale, when scientists look through the Hubble telescope and stuff like that, especially at spiral galaxies, which is why I put it on there, that spiral galaxy, like all other spiral galaxies, does something that shouldn't happen. Spiral galaxies rotate. Think of a music album on a turntable. Oh, nuts. Has anyone ever touched a vinyl black album before? Okay, you know what I'm saying. I got to stop using things that are 50 years old. When the turntable goes around, you know, it goes around in such a way that the stuff on the outer edge and the stuff on the inner edge kind of track together, right? Now, when you look at our solar system, that doesn't happen, because gravity says that the things closer to the star in the center, the sun, has to move faster to stay in their orbit than things on the outside, which move slower. That's the only way that the physics can explain through gravity that they'll actually do that. So when you look at a spiral galaxy that's 35 million light years away, you would expect the inside of the spiral galaxy to be going faster than the outside of the spiral galaxy. But unfortunately, it moves just like a phono record. And so scientists look at that and go, well, that's not right. So they check their data, and well, you know, it's true. Spiral galaxies rotate in a way that doesn't make much sense according to the powers that we know, the forces that we know. There's something that's like, well, I don't know what that's all about. But it can't be explained just by gravity, because gravity should make things in the middle go around faster than things on the edge. So they look at that and they say, well, there must be something we don't understand. I like when scientists say that. There must be something we don't understand about this. We'll call that weird thing that makes it go around like a record album dark energy. Yeah, that sounds good to me. We'll call it dark energy. It's dark energy. And the fact that we can't account for 95% of the mass in the universe, we'll call that dark matter. Now, I'm not making fun of scientists. I'm just saying science has a limitation. And the limitations often bump up against the very nature and core of the way the universe is created. Created from the smallest thing of the atom up to the largest thing of spiral galaxies. And so we're reduced to saying, I don't know, strong force, dark energy. Okay, we're there. Well, this is it right here. And I want you to see, he upholds the universe by what? What's the raw material that keeps it together? His word. The universe came into creation because God said, let there be light, and God holds it together by his word. Now, someday when you get to the end of Revelation, you see that there's a new heavens and a new earth, and the old stuff is just going to kind of go away, and a new thing's going to take its place. All he has to do is stop speaking it, and it goes away. That's the God we have. This is the Son who comes in the minute center of the universe, in Bethlehem. And he's the Word too. Are you hooking anything together here? That's exactly right. He's the Word too. He's the Word that came to speak like the prophets did. He's not going to be well received. He's the one that owns this place, and it's going back to him. It was created by him and for him, to quote Paul. This is his place. This belongs to him. And he came and inhabited it as a small baby. And he, if he stops speaking the word, we all disintegrate. Now, think about this. That also works for the most despicable person who's ever mistreated you badly. He still allows them to hold together. It'd be a whole different place we lived in if when someone injured you and did something thoughtless against you and hurt you, if they went, pfft. Yeah, well, that's the problem. There wouldn't be any of us left, really, because we do that. But I got to tell you, I fantasize about that all the time. Especially on the freeway. I know. And that's it'll get to you, and I wish that they would just, pfft. And I think, God, you just hold things together by the word. You could just stop that word right now with that person. And my life would be a lot easier. Of course, other people are saying about me, I wish you'd do that to him because my life would be all down the list. And suddenly there wouldn't be anybody here. So the God of the universe, this Jesus, who's the creator as well as the one who holds it all together, came into the center of his own creation and continued to hold together this creation while he was even in the middle of it. But at any moment he could have gone, that's it, we're done. Eventually that will happen. Eventually that will happen. And that's the end of the story in the vineyard story. By the way, the only reason that the tenant farmers were allowed to stay on that farm was because of his word. Luke 8:25. And they were afraid and they marveled, saying to one another, who then is this, that he commands even winds and water and they obey him? You remember what happened? What's the context of this? Remember they're in a boat. The apostles are in a boat early in Jesus' ministry. They're all about to die because the waves on the Sea of Galilee are so big, which, by the way, they do get very large. And they're in that boat, and these are trained fishermen who know when the waves are bigger than they can handle, and they know when they're going to die. So they're well informed. And as they're sitting there, and they're struggling with the fact that they're all just minutes away from death, as the winds are whipping the waves, which, by the way, is why there are waves in the Sea of Galilee. It's the winds that come down out of the valleys. They're whipping all that stuff, and Jesus is asleep in the boat. They say, wake him up. They wake him up. We're all going to die. We're all going to die. And then when Jesus says, shh, then the waves stop and the wind stop. Instantly, by the way. If you've ever been on a lake that's got big waves, it takes a while for the waves to die. Can you imagine being on a roiled lake with the waves going like this and they're washing over the gunnels of your boat? Whoosh, and he stands up in the middle of that just trying to keep his balance on the bow of the boat, and he does this, and the whole place goes, whoa. Now that would freak me out. Especially for a fisherman. This is like, no, I don't think so. So when it all goes woof like that, then the apostles in the boat look at each other fearfully. And they say, who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water that they obey him? Who's the only one that can command creation to obey him? God, the creator. They didn't make that connection there. It takes them a couple years to kind of figure this out. But Jesus, in no uncertain terms, as he comes as a baby and becomes a man and displays himself, wants everyone to know that I'm in charge of this place, all the way down to commanding waves to stop. I'm in charge of this place so much that when people die, I can bring them back to life. I'm in charge of this place so much that when people get sick, I can heal them. I'm in charge of this place. Questions? Well, now you see, that's the problem. And I read it for you in John 6 this morning. They looked at Jesus and they said, wait. We know his father and his mother. So, creator of the universe, you got to be kidding. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm not going there. That's just crazy talk. And that's what got him killed. Because as time went on during his 3-year ministry, as he demonstrated the fact that he is indeed the creator himself, and this is one of the best examples, as he demonstrated this, people either had to say, yes, I believe he's the creator of everything, he's the Messiah, or no, I think he's a fraud. He's just a fast-talking fraud. He's got the gift of gab and he can make people believe that. Jesus has these discussions with the Pharisees often. Okay, don't believe who I am based on what I say. If you don't believe what I say, believe based on what I do. I mean, I'm trying to make it easy for you here. I'm the one who's in charge here. It's a very hard thing for them and for all mankind since then to look to Jesus and say, King of kings, Lord of lords, creator through whom all things are made and to whom all things are going. Talk about collision of big and small. That's huge. But that's exactly what the nature of all this is. He upholds the universe by the word of his power. And then, watch carefully, And then, after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. So not only did he come to give us a message about who God was like, and the fact that he, in fact, was the heir of everything, but he also made it so that the squatters have a solution to the problem. So that the owner of the vineyard is not going to come back and deliver miserable death on us. The Son himself. And this is where we depart from the story with the vineyard. Because in that story, even though they killed the Son came back principally to deliver the message of what ought and what will happen because of their injustice. But what's not included in the story is that the Son came in order that the squatters would be saved from the judgment that they're bringing on themselves. And that's what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. After making purification for sins, that's the squatters in the vineyard, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Again, it's an idiomatic phrase to say that he went to the place of ultimate power. Think of a throne room is what you're thinking about. So he goes from being large, the circumference, to being the small center as a baby, communicating the nature of God fully with a perfect imprint, telling us all these things about who God is. And then finally he solves the problem of our own sin by making purification for the sins. He does this. Not telling us how we can achieve it. He does this. See that? And then he's killed and returns to the circumference. That's the Christmas story. The very large became very small in order to communicate who God is and to fix the problem of the rebellion that we brought on ourselves as squatters in God's vineyard called creation. And then after he's killed, he goes back on high to the place of power. And now there's a time gap between that and when the owner of the vineyard comes back. And that's judgment. Having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. This is the beginning of an argument that the writer of Hebrews is going to take. But it's really interesting because he's become as much superior to angels as the name he's inherited is more excellent than theirs. The name of Jesus is what we're talking about. And remember, I've always talked about whenever you see the name of someone in an ancient sense, it means it's like a label. A name is a label that fully represents the nature and character of the person. So we don't do this now, but you name kids in the past, the ancient past, by what their chief characteristics are, which is why you wait to name them. You wait to see what they're good at, and then you name them that. It's part of Native American culture. That's largely passed away as well, but that's ancient. Mankind has done this. So the name that he has inherited, the name of Jesus is the one who's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the Alpha, beginning, and Omega, the end of the alphabet. He's everything. His name is bigger than all names. His name represents the glory of who he is. And so he's saying this one who was large became small, but his name never changed. King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And he sits at the right hand in power right now. And it says in other passages, he's sitting there until all his enemies are made a footstool for his feet. Again, it's a throne king image where a king sits on his throne and the vanquished most powerful generals of the rebellious nations are brought in chains and thrown before the seat of the ultimate authority, and as a sign of superiority over the ones that are vanquished, the king would put his feet on their head, waiting until his enemies are made a footstool for his feet. This king who came as a baby and then went back to the circumference will not be mocked. His power hasn't changed. Even though he came as a baby, it doesn't mean that his power has been revoked. His name was from eternally past and will go to eternally future. His name is the name of ultimate authority. Make no mistake, God is not mocked. You'll reap what you sow when it comes to who Jesus is. So that's why we lose a little bit in the Christmas story when we just leave the baby in the manger, and we know what Jesus is going to turn into. But oh my gosh, this is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who is now in glory and is awaiting the end of all things so that final judgment can come to those who rebel against him and those who are given to him like us, those who want to follow him to become part of his kingdom or included into his kingdom. And then his word that's holding this place together will be released and everything will go whoosh and we'll start over. This is the little baby in the manger. This is why I think when Mary is looking at this baby, I'd just love to know just a few things she was thinking. Because it's just a total mind blower. And she's clued in about who this baby is. Because the angel Gabriel comes and tells her, this is the one whose kingdom will never end. So you mean like, but he's, what? See, it just doesn't, it's craziness. It's just craziness. But the God in the circumference wants to be known fully. So his exact imprint radiates into the creation to let us know who he is, to clue us in about what this whole place is about, and to understand the fact that he's calling many to himself who respond to him, who will say, like Peter did this morning in that passage, you're the guy, you're the Messiah, you're the king. You are the creator. You're the beginning and you're the end. Everything's coming back to you. I'm yours. We need to wrap this up. So let me just kind of do a quick summary. This picture represents this place we're in. You and I live in a wonderful creation of God. Now, it's been tainted by the fall, and man has continued to taint this place even worse. And when we see mass killings, and we see how people are selfish, and we see how people exploit one another, we realize that the damage done in this place isn't largely due to the Creator. In fact, it's not at all. It's due to us. It's due to the created. But nevertheless, it's a great neighborhood. I look up at these mountains over here, and I'm stunned. Oh, wow. Incredible. I look at the way I'm made. I wish my car was made like me. I wish when I dented my fender on my car, it would fix itself. But do you realize you have a body that does that? And it's not you that's fixing it, it's God that's fixing it. You ask any physician. You know, you heal people? Well, I just kind of put the right conditions together, but somehow the body heals itself. We're remarkably made. I mean, come on. We are the beneficiaries of tremendous stuff. There's not a single thing that you benefit from that you can't trace back to the hand of God. Not a single thing. Not a single thing. You and I are both the incredible recipients of a wonderful place and a wonderful body and wonderful blessings. And yet we would prefer to say, God, I want your stuff. I don't want you. And yet it's all put together like this to naturally drive us to say, why did he make me? Why did he make this place? Why am I here? What's this creator one of me? Who is he? Can I understand him? It's all meant in a very natural way to take the creation of mankind and point his eyes back to the creator. And if you had any specific questions about this creator, look at Jesus, who's the exact imprint and the radiance from the circumference of the bright, shining God. So here's the summary. He's Emmanuel. He's God with us. He speaks for the Father, the radiance, the imprint. He also makes the Father known in everything that who he is. That's why he comes from the circumference into the center in this Christmas story. He proves that he's heir of all things. That means everything is going back to him. Everything. He pays for our rebellion. Think of yourself as the squatters in the vineyard. He pays for our rebellion. And now he sits on the throne in power. There's not a single amount, even small amount of his power that's been diminished because he came as a baby. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But for a short time, the writer of Hebrews says, he came down for a little while so we could understand in great detail and depth the nature of God himself and how we fit into his plan. And that's just in the first 4 verses of Hebrews. This is this Jesus. This is this big picture. This is Emmanuel, God with us. Not just come to kind of rub shoulders with us, but come to tell us how we fit in the kingdom he's putting together and how he has paid the price for our rebellion. Wow. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We're going to sing the song, Jesus Messiah, and I want you to watch as we sing this song again, where the writer makes this connection into this King of Kings, this Creator, this God with us, who didn't just come to be with us because it'd be a nice thing to do. He came to be with us to solve the problem of the impending disaster of judgment on the squatters. And that's us. Okay, let's pray, and we'll sing this song out. Lord, this is too big for me to put my arms around. And yet, Lord, I have to admit, I confess I look at Christmas, I wave my hand, I dismiss a lot of the silliness. And in the dismissing, I forget to replace it with the magnitude of the grandeur of this incredible plan, this revealed plan of God himself, Emmanuel, God with us, coming in our midst, from the great to the small, in order that we might come to understand this huge creator. This God who loves us so tremendously that he's willing to die on our behalf, to pay the price of our own selfishly imposed rebellion. And Lord, I pray that as the weeks go on here, as we get closer to Christmas, that you would create in our hearts the same kind of wonder and mystery that was in Mary's heart and Joseph's heart, knowing that in this baby is the one who is the God at the circumference, the God who sees it all, and the God in whose word everything came to existence and everything holds together. See, I just can't get my arms around that at all. But Lord, we so enjoy this time of year because we can sit in quiet wonder, just like the shepherds did, just like the wise men did, just like Mary and Joseph did, in simple wonder, and say, how can this be that this God would come and live in my neighborhood? How can this be? So that we might know the God who loved us so much that he died on our behalf. Ah, it's amazing. So give us that wonder, we pray, and shock us when we fall into the dismissing judgment of the trivialities of this season. Lord, there's so many around us who are compelled by things in the season that don't matter and are busy about things that don't matter. So Lord, work in us that same light that you have in us, that we might be the light of the world as your Spirit speaks through us. And we say, do you know who this baby is? He's the God at the circumference, come near into the center to bring us life. So thanks for this. Amaze our hearts, we pray. We love you so much. Thanks for this message in Jesus' name. Amen.